Okay, terrific. Thank you. And again, good afternoon and welcome to the Standards for Libraries in Higher Education Revision Update. My name is Andrea Falcone, and I have the pleasure of serving as chair of the task force. Also joining us is our co-chair, and I'll turn the mic over to her to introduce herself.
Hi, this is Felice Machevsky from Dominican University here in the Chicagoland area. Good afternoon.
Okay, great. And Felice will be helping out with some of our interactive polls and monitoring the chat discussion as well. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. This session is being recorded, so you'll be able to access today's recording and the corresponding slides. Look for a communication from ACRL with that information after the session. In our short hour together, we'll summarize the charge for the task force, let you know what we've been doing since July of 2016, give some insight into the revision of the document itself, and ask for your feedback. And so some of you may have attended our other open forums that were held at ALA Midwinter Annual and also a virtual open forum last spring. So some of this information will be repetitive simply because we want to make sure we catch everybody up on what's been happening, but there will be new content as well. So please bear with us if some of this looks familiar to you. So let's dive in. First, we want to get a sense of your familiarity with the standards, or SLHE. This is the first of many opportunities where we ask for your feedback. So please use the on-screen polling options to address this prompt. My experience with the standards for libraries in higher education is, and then we have some options. So Felice, would you go ahead and open up that poll for everyone?
I've just lost everything. It's gone.
Oh, no. Okay.
My polling has disappeared.
Okay, no problem. We'll go ahead and we'll do this verbally. So
we've got it. It's back. Lord. All right.
Okay, here we go. Great, thank you. That's excellent. We'll give you a pass, Felice. It's no problem. The first one.
No. This is very odd. So, okay, so we should be on question my experience with the standards for libraries in higher education, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
So, and actually the poll on screen says, what do you use the standards for? So let's change it up a little bit, and that's okay. Go ahead and answer this poll. What do you use the standards for? Do you use them for developing your accreditation reports? Is it for strategic planning library-wide or strategic planning department-wide, assessment-related purposes, all of the above, or other? And if you choose other, we'd be really interested to see in the chat box if you could elaborate on what other refers to in your context. So go ahead and take a moment to answer this poll. Okay, so Felice, are you able to see some polling results?
I'm able to see some comments in the chat box, yes.
Okay. So if you want, you could probably go ahead and close the poll and we could see how folks responded.
So actually, I am not able to even do that. It's like that option is gone.
Okay, wow. We'll improvise a little bit here, folks. Sorry about that. So if you could, just let us know in the chat box, what are you using the standards for, if anything? So that would be accreditation reports, strategic planning library-wide, strategic planning department-wide, assessment-related purposes, all of the above, or something else.
So Andrea, could I interject, please? That first, when you asked about this next question about what to use the standards for, people have responded to that one, so I'm going to go ahead and close it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. So we do see those results, Felice. Thank you for that.
And I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on here.
No problem. We'll make it work. So what do you use the standards for? We see a few people indicated the first few choices. Many folks have selected about 7 out of 17, 41%, all of the above, which I'm very pleased to see that, and we'd be interested to hear more about some of your experiences with implementing the standards as we go along. I did see some comments in the chat box about that. Some for assessment accreditation reports, long-term planning, 3-year assessment schedule, et cetera. So that's really great. Again, these are experiences we hope that you keep in mind as we move forward through the presentation, because we do want to hear your comments and feedback about how the standards, and then of course the appendices, which we'll talk quite a bit about, help you in doing this work, or will continue to help you in doing this work. And folks that did not respond, that's fine. I hope that wasn't on our end, but maybe we can talk about your experience, or maybe you are new to using the standards altogether, which we're glad that you're here as well.
So, Andrea, again, I can try to run the experience with the standards?
Yeah, go ahead. If you can open up that poll, Felice, that would be great. We do want to get a good sense of people's experience in your confidence level. So I do see the poll online on screen now, so if you can see that, please select an option there. My experience with the standards is high, I've used it extensively. Medium, I've used it in my work. Low, I was aware but have not used them in my work. Or none, I was unaware of SLHE, so I have not had the opportunity yet to use them in my work. So go ahead and answer that poll.
Okay. Looks like we've only got about 14, so I can go ahead and close it?
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So we are seeing those results on screen now. Yeah, this is interesting. So about 28% have used SLHE extensively. 17% have used it in their work, and then 22% and 6% have either used it just a little bit or not at all, which again is really great. So this is good for us to see, especially in terms of the comments that we receive from you. It kind of helps us contextualize just a little bit as we move forward. So thank you, and thanks, Felice, for running that poll for us.
Okay. Thank you for being so patient.
Okay, so folks, if you wanted to, you can X out of that poll so you no longer see the results. It's up to you, and we will be using the chat moving forward. So just wanted you to know that you can change that viewing capability. So regardless of your experience with the standards, we thought some background about our committee charge might be helpful. The current standards were approved in 2011 and are being reviewed as part of the typical 5-year review cycle. That is to say, nothing unusual has sparked this particular review. So our charge is as one might expect and includes reviewing the SLHE, reviewing outcomes as articulated in Regional Accrediting Association guidelines, incorporating accreditation standards, reviewing the performance indicators and expanding on them, recommending needed changes, producing a draft, and seeking comments from stakeholders such as yourselves, and then producing the final draft. And we're really fortunate to have a great team working on this revision. This team includes 15 members with representation from all types of academic libraries and an accrediting agency representative. A few of our members are here with us today, and I'd like to acknowledge the time, dedication, and intellectual energy that they've put forth thus far. You may see them contribute to the chat, happening on the sidebar as we go along. So we have one more poll here, and that is, now that you know a bit about us, we'd really like to know more about you. So what type of institution are you affiliated with? And so what we're looking for here, as soon as Felice is able to open those polling options, we want to know if you're with a 2-year degree granting institution, 4-year degree granting with graduate programs, a special library, or other. And again, if you are selecting other, please include in the chat box some information that helps us contextualize that answer.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it.
Okay. Okay, we're seeing the results here. This is very interesting. Actually, about 50% of us are working with 4-year degree granting institutions that incorporate graduate level programs. Okay, so one thing to keep in mind as we move forward is that these perspectives really help inform how we contextualize the standards, how we would use them, how we envision what they look like at our institutions. And so this, again, really helps give us some insight to the comments and the discussion we'll be having later on. Okay, thank you all very much. Again, you can close that polling feature if you do not wish to see those results moving forward. And again, we'll be focusing on the chat box from now on. Thank you all again. So we're going to skip this next slide. You all have already answered this poll. What do you use the standards for? So we'll just move forward here. So keeping all of this in mind, you know, our context, our experience, we'd like to tell you what we've done so far as a task force. We've reviewed literature on future trends in libraries and higher education. We've compiled a selected annotated bibliography summarizing relevant research on changes in higher education that could potentially impact the standards. That annotated bibliography included 6 categories, beginning with resources about higher education and academic library trends, and then moves into topical areas like accreditation and assessment. While this annotated bibliography is by no means exhaustive, it aims to give the task force direction by exposing connections between the standards and recent trends. We also talked with some key stakeholders, including the Standards for Libraries and Higher Education Task Force, and that would be the original task force that created the standards, the presentation team for planning, assessing, and communicating library impact, and I know we have some of those presenters with us virtually today. We also spoke with regional accreditation agencies, the ACRL adjunct consultants, and ACRL's Academic Library Trends and Statistics Survey Editorial Board. By gathering a variety of perspectives, these groups gave insight to the practicality of the current standards. We asked them questions about what's working well, what's not working well, and why not. All of these efforts led us to tease out a few overarching themes. These themes are listed on the right-hand side of the slide. So those themes or topical areas include open educational resources, scholarly communications, accreditation, student success and retention, and the role of student employees. In May, we produced a draft with minor revisions to the principles and performance indicators. That included 9 revised principles or performance indicators. For the most part, we made revisions for further clarity and to be more inclusive. We also added 2 new performance indicators. These changes were posted for feedback on ALA Connect, and the older drafts are still available, but we now have a fully updated version available through the link that is posted here on the slide. This is likely the link that you used. This is the ACRL Insider posting, which got you also to register for this particular open forum. So it's likely that you've already looked at this draft. Then at ALA Annual in June, we focused on our open forum on the changes and gathering feedback actually about the appendices. We don't have enough time to go through each change together, but I just want to highlight a few. So first we'll start with the standards themselves. And just kind of as a refresher, there are 9 principles. And remember that these are broad areas like institutional effectiveness, educational role, space. We're only suggesting changes within 5 of those 9 areas. To give you a better sense, I'll highlight a change from each of those 5 areas. So the first example is within Principle 3, educational role. So here's the original language. Library personnel collaborate with faculty and others regarding ways to incorporate library collections and services into effective education experiences for students. In the revision, we emphasize that collections and services can and should be incorporated within curricular and co-curricular experiences. This helps draw attention to educational experiences that happen outside of the traditional learning environment, although not excluding that environment. Here is an example within the principal space. The library uses physical and virtual spaces as intellectual commons, providing access to programs, exhibits, lectures, and more. The revision reads, the library uses physical and virtual spaces as intellectual commons according to the library mission. So here I think you can see that we're trying to simplify while also giving libraries a little bit more freedom to make sure that these performance indicators actually meet the needs of their particular institution. So here we're focusing on the library mission, as we know, are all unique in some ways, and so we're giving a little bit more freedom here that folks don't have to focus on programs, exhibits, lectures. They could focus on whatever it is that aligns with their library mission. So the next example repeatedly came up in our stakeholder conversations, and this is about management and administration. Many colleagues felt like this principle only related to those serving in administrative roles. This original statement focuses on management and administration and planning and assessment. So we decided to broaden the language for inclusivity. The revision, again, is broader and it includes leadership. We also broadened the focus from resource allocation to all types of decision making. Hopefully you can see yourself in this principle regardless of the official title you hold in your library. Here's an example about the principal personnel. personnel responsible for enhancing and maintaining the library's IT infrastructure, keep current with library technology applications, and participate in ongoing training. There was some confusion about using the language, I quote, IT infrastructure, as some libraries have their own IT departments and some rely on campus IT as just an example. So you may have a different version of that at your library. But this revised version focuses on library technology more broadly. The revision reads, personnel keep current with library technology applications and infrastructure and participate in ongoing training. We also added 2 new performance indicators, and interestingly enough, they are both under the principal personnel. The first is focused on student employees. This is actually the first time student employees are explicitly mentioned within the standards. So 8.7, again, a new performance indicator reads, library personnel engage with library student employees to provide mentoring and work that enhances their overall academic experience. The other new performance indicator is 8.8. This puts an emphasis on the constant evolution of our professional roles. And 8.8 reads, library personnel continuously examine and transform roles to meet the needs of the evolving organization. And here is our last example, and it's within external relations. It reads, library personnel convey a consistent message about the library and engage in their role as ambassadors in order to expand user awareness of resources, services, and expertise. In this case, we decided to make a simplification. This change will help libraries focus on the messaging to external stakeholders rather than focus on what does the role of ambassador mean. Again, we've seen this come up quite a few times, especially during the standards workshops that we've hosted, and oftentimes participants really focus on this ambassador piece, when really what we want to ensure and what we want to measure is that we're conveying a consistent message about the library. So again, just simplifying. So here I want to pause and welcome any questions or comments regarding the principles or performance indicators, anything that struck you or was potentially confusing, or you'd like a little more context to be provided. So we'll take a moment and pause, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to indicate those within the chat box.
So we've got a question about if we can share an example of a co-curricular education.
Yeah, okay, so that's terrific. I think that came from Emily. Thanks, Emily, for that question. Co-curricular education, the first thing that comes to mind for me might be something that's more along the lines of like service learning, but others may have examples of this. We know that there are learning opportunities and experiences happening outside of the traditional classroom. So this could be community projects, community service initiatives. You know, I'm sure there are really a number of things.
So if you high impact experiences that the students are currently doing on campuses.
Yeah, yeah. So again, a lot of that may revolve around service learning. But if others have examples of co-curricular education that's happening on your campus, please feel free to add that here as well. I'm sure there are a variety of experiences within our attendees here today. Even too, Emily, I'm thinking of, if perhaps there's like a field experience that isn't part of a credit-bearing course, but it's perhaps optional. Also, leadership opportunities for students to participate in clubs and student organizations. Those could be considered co-curricular. Some institutions actually offer co-curricular transcripts as well. And so that's an additional transcript that really highlights any of the activities a student has done beyond credit-bearing requirements.
Mm-hmm.
Great, yeah, so okay, I see some good examples here too. Yeah, working with Common Read. There are oftentimes a lot of activities and learning experiences associated with Common Read on campuses. Yeah, terrific.
Can we also, or would we also be able to use different programming that the library does to bring students into the library when they normally wouldn't, like on a Friday evening?
Yeah.
For example, our library has a murder mystery in the library, and then they go out looking for clues.
Interesting. Yes, I think that's a terrific example. Any kind of additional programming that the library might provide or participate in or collaborate in would be could be qualified as co-curricular. Yeah. Thank you, Felice. It's a great example. Okay. Any other questions before we move forward? And we'll have more opportunities as well. So I realize, that sometimes you need to mull these things over. It's a lot of information to take in, and I am showing an awful lot of text because we're focused on a written document here. So we'll go ahead and move on. Again, if you have questions at any moment, please feel free to include them in the chat box. If we don't see them right away, we will at a stopping point come back to those. Okay, so overall, the feedback we received on these revisions has been very positive. Interestingly, though, the things that many people appreciate about the standards, like the broad language and the flexibility, are the very same things that others find frustrating. And I want to acknowledge those frustrations and let you know that we spent much energy on revising the appendices for this very reason. And these are the tools that will aid in the application and use of the standards. There are two important tools within the SLHE. The first is Appendix 1, which lists sample outcomes for select performance indicators. So during our revision, we aimed to include at least one sample outcome for each principal, to include sample outcomes for any new performance indicators. And remember, I mentioned a few slides ago that there are 2 new performance indicators. We also aim to simplify any original outcomes that included more than one verb. So we tried to, again, focus so that we could make these a little more easily measurable. And we aim to point users to additional resources for outcome development. And we have to really focus a little bit more on this, so your ideas would be most welcome. So here's an example of an added sample outcome. This is within Principle 6, and again, that's space. The performance indicator that this sample is related to is 6.7. So I've listed 6.7 here so you can contextualize it a little bit, and then we have the sample outcome. So 6.7 reads, the library provides clean, inviting, and adequate space conducive to study and research. with suitable environmental conditions and convenient hours for its services, personnel, resources, and collections. So the sample outcome for this performance indicator reads, students recognize the library as a welcoming environment. Again, this is a performance indicator that did not have a sample outcome. This is to help you in determining how you can provide evidence and information about your library's value and how the library is actually measuring this particular performance indicator. So here's another example. This is under Principle 7, Management, Administration, and Leadership. And this is 7.2. Library personnel participate in campus decision-making needed for effective library management. So again, to align with this performance indicator, we've said, here's a sample outcome for you to think about using. Again, you don't have to, but if it works for you, this could be one of your sample outcomes. Library administration participate on campus-wide decision-making committees. So you would go through a process here, right, and gather evidence to say, all right, well, how many committees have the participation of our library administration, right, and are those committees campus-wide? So in this case, it could be really a simple count of how many decision-making committees your library administration participates in. So here's yet another example, again with Principle 7. And this one reads, the library communicates assessment results to library stakeholders. So a possible outcome would read, faculty include the library's assessment results in the program review process. Okay, so again, if you were to achieve that outcome, you would be aligning that with this performance indicator. Yes, faculty do include the library's assessment results in program review processes. Here are some examples, right? We've collected over the course of a semester, over the course of a year, whatever it might be. And so we've said, yes, we are in fact successful in meeting this performance indicator. So I realize that, again, this is slightly out of context for everyone. This is Appendix 1. It does have sample outcomes for every principal, not every performance indicator, but every principal. And so this is to be used as a tool when you are trying to think about how you would provide evidence and show and demonstrate that, in fact, the library does meet this performance indicator, right? We do meet this standard. So that was really a very quick overview of Appendix 1. So I do want to just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions. Also, if you've had experiences with these sample outcomes, whether that be very positive experiences or challenging ones, feel free to include some of that experience within the chat box. It may help some of our other attendees get a sense of how these are being used at other institutions. Okay, so I'm not seeing any comments at this time, which is fine. So we'll go ahead and press on again. If something comes up, please feel free to add it. So similarly, we are seeking your impressions about Appendix 2, and this is the benchmarking and peer comparison section of the document. The original standards included a list of sample benchmarks by type. So you can see an excerpt here focused on broad categories of staffing, holdings, expenditures, etc. And so in the revision, we aim to provide an overview of the use and value of institutional peer comparisons, to share sample benchmarks that align with the final principles and performance indicators and the sample outcomes, and to point users to additional resources for benchmark development and peer comparison strategies. So let's look at a few examples. We added this example under Principle 1, Institutional Effectiveness. Okay, so total library expenditures as a percentage of total institutional expenditures. So again, this is an example that was not present. We're reorganizing the appendix so that it is by principle rather than these sort of broad topical categories. So again, if you were thinking about trying to provide information and evidence that said, yes, we have institutional effectiveness, you could use this measurement as a way to demonstrate that. And again, it's just one example. Under Principle 2, which is professional values, I'll say that this one has been a bit challenging for us to measure. Most of the performance indicators refer to resisting censorship, valuing intellectual property, and academic integrity, right? So when we think about professional values, these are probably some of the things that come to mind. So the example here suggests we measure the number of seats librarians hold on campus committees. This measure would connect directly with 2.6, which I've included here. The library engages in collaborations both on campus and across institutional boundaries. So again, if you're thinking about how would I demonstrate and gather evidence about professional values, in this case, how does the library engage in collaborations on campus? You could use the example of the number of seats librarians hold on campus committees. And again, this is kind of an easier count to make, hopefully something that you're already tracking at your institution. So let's take a look at Principle 6, Space. There are a number of examples here. So if you were thinking about how can we actually provide evidence and say that we are meeting the standards in Principle 6 regarding space, you might look at things like ratio of library seats to the full-time enrollment of your student population, number of hours open each week during academic sessions. You might also look at the number of days you're open each fiscal year. You could examine gate counts. You likely already do this, or at least collect it, but you could look at gate counts per student FTE. You could look at those gate counts during extended hours for fall and spring semesters. You could also look at the number of staffed public service points that are functioning within your library. So here I'll pause though, and I want to just say that a lot of this is contextual. So the standards do not provide a benchmark for you that says, the number of hours open each week during academic sessions should look like this. Okay, so this is something where you have to think about your context to make comparisons, perhaps year to year. Maybe it's semester to semester, depending what you're looking at. Also, this is where the importance of peer comparison comes into play. So if you have peer institutions or aspirational peers, you could look at some of their data and make some comparisons. And while this is not always collected, these particular types of data points might not be collected and available, you could always reach out to particular institutions and form partnerships and see if they're collecting some of this data, or how you could begin to work collaboratively to make these comparisons moving forward. So again, just kind of a simple example, number of staff public service points. The standards are not telling you you must have 5 public service points that are staffed, all hours that the library is open, but we're giving you an idea here of how you might gather and provide evidence regarding the space in your library. Principle 7, management, administration, and leadership. Again, this is usually a challenging one. And so some examples might be the cost per hour open. So again, the cost per hour for running your facility. Maybe total operating expenditures per student. Principle 9, external relations. Here are some additional examples. You could think about collecting and commenting on the number of community user library cards that you offer or are currently active. You could look at social media. Again, thinking about external relations. Have you had follower growth on Twitter? How many interactions do you typically have per Facebook post? Right, so this is an area that has been growing rapidly within academic libraries, but are we measuring this in order to connect it with the success of our organization and of our institution? You could also look at annual gifts as a percentage of total giving. So there are, I think, some really terrific ideas there. So don't worry, I'm not expecting you to read this slide. I simply wanted to exemplify that some principles have more examples than others, and the task force has whittled these down a bit. But it helps to illustrate that the appendices are not comprehensive, okay, on any given topic or principle or performance indicator. They are merely examples for you to begin working with or to build upon. Okay? But of course, under collections, you have examples like total library materials expenditures per student. Okay? So these, I think, are commonly being recorded or looked at within libraries. Maybe not all of these, but a select number of these. So I think that this is a great example that demonstrates, again, we're not trying to be comprehensive with all the types of evidence you could collect and comparisons you can make, but that these are ideas to work from. So again, I'd like to pause. I know this is a lot of information, so are there questions or comments regarding the benchmarking section that you would like us to consider? So Tara, thank you for that comment. Interesting. Okay, so you're looking to develop a benchmarking data set for community colleges in Illinois, it looks like, this year. So I'm wondering if you'd mind if I ask a follow-up, and you may not be too far along on this particular project, but what is the general idea? Is it so that you all can look at some of these kinds of data points and begin to make recommendations to your administration, or is it for your accreditation reports, or what might you be hoping that folks will use this benchmarking data set for? And thanks, Lisa, for the comment there. Internal, external benchmarking ideas. Yeah, I think that was one of the things that we saw, and I think you've also been exposed to as one of the standards presenters, that folks did struggle a little bit with this piece, thinking internally and externally. So I really want to keep close track of our time here. So I think we will continue to move forward in the slides. Again, if you have more comments, questions, please feel free to include them. We'll probably have a few moments at the end to address those as well. So I want to kind of, this seems a little backwards, but I want to go back into thinking about the introduction to the standards document. Because within that introduction, there are two assessment models that we're encouraged to use in conjunction with the standards. And the first is the evidence-based model. And so I have, a graphic here that displays that model. And you can see it's quite simple. It relies really on collecting evidence. So you move through identifying principles that are relevant to what you are trying to measure. And you would select particular performance indicators, and then you would gather evidence. So this is likely something that your library already does, and they probably do it quite regularly. So think about things like gate counts, usage statistics, although not always simple to collect, numbers of instruction sessions, reference interactions, and the like. So we're not posing any change to this model. It remains a three-step process. So again, there's no difference here, but I think it's important to note this because it is a crucial piece of the standards document. And the other model, we're recommending a slight change. So this is the second model, the outcomes-based model, which is more powerful because it focuses on positively impacting or changing user behavior. So it requires more steps, as you can see. So you start with the principles, identify relevant principles that you would like to measure, and then relevant performance indicators. And then you would develop outcomes, which we saw in Appendix 1, sample outcomes. And then you would conduct an assessment, and then you would provide evidence. So based on recommendations from the standards presenters team, who again are the folks out delivering workshops to institutions and consortiums about how to implement these models using the standards. So we talked with them quite a bit, and we decided to go along with their recommendation. They said, keep this model the same, except please change the language in the last step of this model. So really what we've done here is change the language from evidence to impact. And I think that this really helps clarify that you're measuring the impact of the change on user behavior rather than simply providing evidence, right? So we want to know how has user behavior positively changed, hopefully positively changed, and so again, we're just changing that language in the very last step here. Just a quick note about accreditation, because this was one of the major pieces of the charge for the task force. Like the 2010 task force, we also checked in with regional accrediting agencies to gauge the usefulness and alignment of the SLHE in their work. In essence, these accrediting bodies felt that the task force created a set of standards that provide libraries with a structure that fits in seamlessly with institutional accreditation reports. So this is a really helpful tool. Using the standards helps libraries to follow accreditation trends, such as using assessment results for continuous improvement, focusing on student success outcomes, benchmarking, and aligning library and institutional missions. So within here, we see the language that we see represented most broadly within the standards. So, this is meant to be a tool that can help with your accreditation reports, whether that is for your institution as a whole or for program reviews or accreditation of particular programs, schools, degrees, certificates, and that sort of thing within your particular organization. And so accreditation reports and standards really focus on assessment and looking at continuous improvement. Again, that's what these standards are meant to help us do in our profession. And so we are highlighting outcomes and benchmarking, and that's Appendix 1 and 2, and overall trying to align the library with its institutional mission. So our next steps from this point will be, we will, based on your feedback, we will be making revisions if appropriate and necessary, and then we will be submitting a final version of the standards to the ACRL Standards Committee for approval, and this is, again, the typical process. Overall, though, we do want to hear from you. I do appreciate the participation in the chat box and with the polls today, but we have an online feedback form which dives a little bit deeper into comments that you may have regarding each of the sections of the standards. So, you know, there's a question for you to provide some reflection and feedback about the introduction to the standards, the principles, the performance indicators, and then also the appendices. And so we're really asking for that information to be shared with us by Tuesday, September 12th. So since we do have to write a final report and share that with the Standards Committee, we need a little bit of time to do that. And so we have just a few minutes left. So are there any overarching questions or things that you would like answered, or you'd like me to speak a little more contextually about?
We have a comment from Emily saying we've got some very useful models and she appreciates the work. And then Lisa had also commented about we no longer have a model with a name and then some word appearing in the other model. So.
Right. That's great. No, I appreciate that actually. I mean, it's this kind of feedback that helps us feel like we are on the right path moving forward, because these are really for everyone to be using as they see appropriate, and so we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all different types of academic libraries, which is quite a challenge. And again, I have to say that it's really due to the members of the task force and all those willing individuals that were talking with us on the phone, answering our surveys, providing feedback at the open forums that we have gotten to this point with the document. So thank everybody, thanks to you all for participating in those ways as well.
Thanks, Lisa, for sharing the link.
Great. Yes, thank you, Lisa. That's helpful. It's also listed on that ACRL Insider blog post, again, the one that you used to register for this webinar today. But thank you for that. It's really helpful. Okay, terrific. So we've got a corrected URL there. No problem. Thank you for that. And again, we'd appreciate having that feedback by Tuesday, September 12th. It's not really an in-depth feedback form, and you can skip sections of it if they are, if you don't have relevant commentary for those particular sections. So it's not onerous by any means. Okay, so it doesn't look like we have a lot of questions here or comments, which is fine. Really today is about providing some insight and some snippets, excerpts if you will, about changes that have happened in the document. The full draft is posted online again through the ACRL Insider blog post, so you can review that entire draft, and hopefully that will provide some more continuity to this whole process. So I'm going to move to our final slide here, and I just want to include the contact information for myself and for Felice. Again, we have the feedback form, but if you do have questions or comments or you want to have a dialogue, I encourage you to talk with any of us on the task force. Please do feel free to let us know if you would like a discussion. But I do want to thank you today for your time, attention, and thoughtful participation over the last hour. And please look forward to receiving an email from ACRL about this recording, a copy of the slides, and I'm hoping we'll also include a link to the newly revised document for you to review and the feedback form. So thank you all very, very much for your time today. Greatly appreciated, and we'll be in touch. So please stop the recording, Sophie, when you have an opportunity.